Hello, guess what? It's week 5, and we only have really 3 more weeks because the last week is really just 2 days that week. So we're getting there. And I'll just do the normal what we do every week, a few housekeeping things. This is Sunday morning. Do not forget that your tests are due at 5 o'clock today. Um, Tests are always 5 o'clock on Sunday. Article analyses are always midnight on Wednesdays. All right. We have some confusion about that. It's a well set difference there. So I also, as you know from the announcement I made forum posts are Monday through Thursday. The first week, in order to get started, we did it Tuesday to Friday. And then Labor Day week, I decided that, well, you didn't need one up there on Labor Day. Labor Day is supposed to be off, so we did that one Tuesday to Friday. The rest are Monday through Thursday, 4 times a week. So and they go up in the morning. Usually when I get here, if I don't forget to make them visible, like I messed up last week, and so I put a little reminder on my calendar so it dings and says, "Put that up there." And then they come down the next morning, usually around 8 on Tuesday, Thursday, maybe a little bit before 8 because I teach seated class at 8 o'clock. And then Thursday stays up until Monday when I put up the new one. So anyway, that's what's going on. Article analyses are due this week also on Wednesday. I have finished all but 6 of them. They will be done by later today. They're taking some time because I want to take some time with grammatical markings and those kinds of things. So I would suggest proofreading. Some of you all have lost some points because of grammatical issues. And here's one thing that I've told to probably at least 10 of you. Read it out loud. Read it out loud because you will hear some of those mistakes. Read it out loud to someone else. If I marked your paper, and there are a few of you all that I did, they said, these sentences aren't making sense. All right, read it out loud to someone else, and that will help you. Yes, I do mark grammar. Yes, this is not a grammar class. But we expect you as communication majors to have good communication skills when you leave. And one of those good communication skills is proper grammar. You also see me mark on your tests. I don't grade grammatical errors, but just some glaring things sometimes I'll mark it. And the biggie is me and so-and-so, right? You don't say me and so-and-so. You say so-and-so and me, if that's what fits, or so-and-so and I. All right. So don't, what that says is that you don't have proper grasp of grammatical correctness. So, that's a biggie. You all learn that in junior high school, and you know how to tell whether it's me or I. And if you don't, the tip is you remove the other person. So if you wanted to say, me and my friends went to this concert, no. The constant, I want you to fix that, all right? You don't remove the other people and say, me went to the concert, all right? I went to the concert. So that's the rule for fixing it. Yes, we're hearing it a whole lot more. We even hear news broadcasters using the me and so. It's like there's this, you've got to worry about your spoken grammar. There's this TV commercial that comes on for one of the insurance companies, and I'm not going to name it. I have a friend that's one of their PR people there. So I was like, they interview this woman, and she goes, "I seen it." It's like, no, I didn't. I seen it. I saw it, or I have seen it. So watch your grammar. All right, off my grammar soapbox. But please, no, you're going to have a college degree. You need to be using proper grammar. So anyway, off the soapbox. Sorry. Or I guess I should say sorry, not sorry. um, Test questions. Y'all did very well on this first one. I'm hoping the same thing later today. Please make sure you read the question carefully, all right, and answer all parts of it. All right. Sometimes there's uh, um, a second part that some of y'all left off. Some of y'all lost points because of that. You would only answer the first part. You read the whole question. Also, there were some issues about the numbering of questions. Don't change the numbers is all I ask, because when I grade, I sit down with the test and I grade everybody's 1. Then I grade everybody's 2. I get the answer in my brain, and then I grade everybody's 1, everybody's 2, everybody's 3. And so when you remove the numbers, which there were 3 of you all that I made you go back and put the numbers back on, all right, and or if you decide you're not going to answer one, so you pull it out of there. There were some of y'all that didn't answer a few of those, and mostly, I mean, you were great about just leaving it there and not answering it. That's what I would prefer, because when you pull one out, then it renumbers itself. So don't, just make sure that when I'm grading the right question for you. You don't want to lose points because you removed one and it's like, this doesn't answer that question. So anyway, I can't think of anything else, but if I do, I'll send an announcement or that, whatever, to help you there. And one last thing. The article analyses I've been reading have been great. Some of y'all miss a few parts. That's why I do that rubric sheet, so that you know what I'm going to be reading for. And I don't have to read it in that order that it's on that list. That's what I'm looking for when I read your paper. I read your paper, do the grammatical markings, and then I go fill out the rubric. So but those things that are on that list on the rubric are what I'm looking for. Y'all have done very well on these. I haven't given a grade lower than a B on it, and that's pretty good for first time folks, because first time you have no clue what the professor's really looking for. So y'all did great. So are doing great, and those 6 of you still waiting, you will be doing great too. So okay, let's go look at the chapters. We're doing chapters 22 to 27 this week. This section, where it's starting with 22, is the public rhetoric, public speaking. Y'all took it. All this should be review for you. And so it's important to make sure that you get a grasp of this, because this is mostly what we've been noted for, is that, oh, you teach public speaking. In fact, I did a workshop yesterday down in Greenville, North Carolina, and and I said, they were talking about someone number. They went, I'm a speech teacher, not a math teacher. So, the whole aspect of public speaking is what our field was based on. So that's why we go back to to Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and all those people in the field of communication, that those are our roots. So in fact, I'm not quite sure why Griffin et al. Does not start with public, because that's where our base is. If you recall back to 20 some odd chapters ago, they begin with interpersonal communication. And I think they probably do that because we pay more attention to interpersonal communication these days than we do to public. Anyway, we're talking about rhetoricians and how they study communication. This area, when it's studied, is almost always more interpretive. There are some people that try to do some objective research with it, but it's mostly interpretive. So go back to the Greeks and Romans, and the invention, arrangement, style, all those good things, right, that we talk about there. Talk about audience adaptation in these chapters, how to deal with the audience, topics the audience want to see, and basically pick apart public communication. And some of your form questions will ask you to do that. This is where we'll get in trouble, because sometimes I'll say pick a figure, and some of y'all will pick a political figure, and there are such differing views on political figures that we get different messages there. So anyway, that's the introductory part to the public communication section. Chapter 22 is just Aristotelian rhetoric. All right, so the rhetoric of Aristotle. That's our basis. For when we study public communication, when we teach public communication, that's where we begin, is with Aristotle. I always love talking about the speech teachers were not well liked back in Aristotle's day. They called them sophists, and Plato scoffed at the sophists, as the textbook will tell you, because he thought that teaching people to speak publicly and speak effectively publicly, right, was hoodwinking people, manipulative, sorcery type of thing. So he didn't like people teaching public speaking at all, which is funny because we tie all our basis of teaching public speaking back to Aristotle. Aristotle deplored demagoguery, and he thought that that's what some people did with their public speaking skills. So he's credited with looking at different types of speaking. Aristotle believed you had to know what you were talking about, requires wisdom, and you had to be a good speaker, right, which was the eloquence end of it. So Aristotle's rhetoric does I can't get my cursor to go, sorry. That's part of the problem with this computer. Since the day I had it, I can never see the cursor on the screen. The rhetoric, of course, is discovering all forms of persuasion. Usually when we're going to study rhetoric, we talk about the issue of studying persuasion. Aristotle basically labeled, or they claim he labeled, 3 types of speaking. One was forensic speaking, which is speaking in the courtroom, speaking to be judged. Deliberative speaking, which is political speaking, and ceremonial speaking, which is epideictic speaking. So those were the 3 main types that he talked about. These were the days when people would stand in the city square, and I'm pointing out my window, in the city square, and give their speeches and basically rant. A lot of people would say. So that's the type of thing. So what the biggest issue that I want you to recall out of Aristotle, though, are things that we have talked about already. I'm going to refer you back to them. Ethos, E-T-H-O-S, some people say ethos, all right, which is I define it as the image or impression that you make as a communicator. It's the personal proof, all right. The textbook's going to add ethics to that, so the ethical proof, who you are as a person. Credibility comes into play there. A lot of people say ethos and ethos and credibility are synonymous. They are not. All right. Credibility is part of ethos, but there's a whole lot more to it. So we talk about ethos, the more personal proof. We talk about logos, L-O-G-O-S, all right? That's the logical proof. That's the informational proof. That's where you do your research, all right? And back up what you have to say. And then this is also, you'll see a discussion about the use of the enthymeme, which means that that's an argument you put out there that you want the audience to finish the logic of it so that they buy into what you're saying. Remember, we're talking persuasion on this because that was Aristotle's belief. There are different types of public speaking, of course. But so the enthymeme would be similar to the chapter we talked about earlier with the where you need to finish the message on your own. All right, that message becomes part of your brain, not just the person trying to persuade you. words that are coming out of their mouth. So, and then the emotional proof is pathos or pathos, P-A-T-H-O-S. So, and that's where people use emotional proofs to try and get people to do things. You know, do we spur people to be angry about something so they do something? Are they afraid of something? Do they do something? Are they in love with something so they do something? So, and then Aristotle is credited with one of the most important things that we talk about, which are the 5 canons of rhetoric, and that's invention, coming up with the idea. Doesn't mean you invent something, you make up your own art, your own research and stuff. It means that you invent the argument, which means research, backing it up, etc. Then you arrange it, you put it in a organize it. A style, you choose a style, might be a language style, it might be, that's where you may change, for example, back on my rant about the grammar. All right, but you may go into an audience that you need to be using more colloquial grammar. All right, so that would be part of style, language choice, grammatical choices. So then the delivery of it, all right, and then memory. Now, we sometimes teach memory as the lost canon, and the reason is because nobody likes to listen to a memorized speech, right? It's just like somebody reading to you. Nobody wants to be read to either. So the memory was definitely part of it with Aristotle's canons there, the canons of rhetoric. Ethical reflection is about the myth of the golden mean. There is no really common ground because every audience is different, every speaker is different, so you can't have a mean. I mean, the midpoint. So Aristotle, by the way, did not believe that audience adaptation was not the best idea, because that would mean you were being false because you were changing what you were saying to fit the audience. We don't teach it that way in public speaking classes anymore. So the critique of this one is it stood the test of time. Thousands of years later, we still talk about Aristotle and his teachings in public speaking classes and in all our rhetoric classes. And I taught persuasion this summer, and yes, we talked about Aristotle, of course. So, all right. On to chapter 23. And this is a fascinating one to me. It's basically the basis for how we teach public speaking here on campus. And this one and the next one. But it has to do with dramatics in a speech. So dramatism is the theory, and Kenneth Burke is the most common theorist that we refer to when we talk about dramatism. And what Burke would say is that life is not like a drama. Life is a drama. So therefore, that's what should be happening in public communication. You're going to see there's this whole discussion about this dramatistic pentad that has 5 different parts to it. You have the act, you have the scene, you have the agent, you have the agency, you have the purpose. And all those things help build the drama of that public presentation that you're going to do, and that you should pay attention to those. And so when you do that, you're looking at the public speech as a form of dramatic presentation. Doesn't matter the purpose so much, but that drama will always be there. All of us have heard cut and dried speeches that have absolutely no drama to them, and we know that they do not engage in the audience, which is what we'll talk about in the next chapter, which is the narrative paradigm. Narrative paradigm and this chapter cross over a whole lot. There are good things about some terms that you use to create that drama. God terms and devil terms. God terms are your important terms to you. The word speaker The words the speaker uses to which all other positive words are subservient, which means that that's the most important positive term to you. And these are going to be different for each one of you. All right, those terms that are your God terms. And then the devil terms. All right, those are the ones that all things connoted, with this, that the connotation of these are negative. Those are devil terms. In American society, we're told that our God terms are success, money. Some people would say capitalism. Some people, and the devil terms, well, and those will vary for all of y'all. I can't imagine that all of you all would say, oh yeah, those are mine. All right, but I'm looking here to see what else I want you to pay attention to. One of the things that Burke says that you want to think about in terms of the audience is that word guilt, G-U-I-L-T. Guilt. Why did I spell that for you? You all know how to spell it. I guess because I did it with ethos, pathos, and logos, but guilt was what you created in the audience to get them to do what you want them to do. This is where you create tension in the audience. You guilt them into being persuaded. And that became a part of it, that, that's what people used, was in order to get people to do something for you. For them, they would use things that guilted them into it. So we get into how do we get out of the guilt? Well, you redeem yourself. They call it the redemption, guilt redemption cycle. How do you get them out of the feeling guilty? Well, you give them something to get them so they don't feel guilty anymore. And we get into things like mortification, where you confess the guilt and then you request for forgiveness. Or victimage, these are the victims. We see a lot of victimage. We don't see as much mortification in public speaking, dramatic public speaking situations, but we do see more victimage. These are the victims and we need to do something for them. Don't you feel bad for them? You see it in advertising a lot, but you also see it in public speeches. And then identification was another aspect of dramatism. And this will carry over into the next chapter on narration also. Identification, Burke said that if you couldn't get the audience to identify with you or whatever it was that you were trying to get them to do, all right, then there will be no persuasion. So get the audience to identify with you. And how do you get them to identify with you? You get them to like you. You point out similarities. You do things that person says, oh yeah, I can identify with that. So those are important. There's a concept called homophily. That one I will spell for you. It's HOMOPHILY. And what that refers to, you're going to see it in the chapter and in the PowerPoint, but what that refers to is that there's a similarity between you and me. There are things that are similar between the speaker and the audience. And that will help you get the audience to identify with you faster than anything else. So you seek for those things and point them out. The critique, they in this chapter, they take a speech and critique it using the Burkean theory. So make sure that you go back and look at that, the dramatistic pentad. The critique is that this is really more complex than it sounds on the surface. So it's not really great for a beginning theorist who wants to study public speaking with that interpretive method. It's not that easy to do. The next one, the narrative paradigm, will be. So we'll move on to that next one. Okay, chapter 24 is the narrative paradigm, which I've already mentioned a few times, and this crosses over back to the previous chapter of Walter Fisher. I will tell you that it is the most common public speaking theory that we use here on this campus when we teach public speaking. All our public speaking classes are taught from the point of view that you need to be using narratives in your public speeches to keep your audience with you. The reason is when you tell a story, which is what a narrative is, when you tell a story in your speech, your audience will automatically turn right to you, just like that. All right. There's a good discussion in the text about how it becomes a compelling. All right. It has to be a compelling story. It doesn't need to be, it shouldn't be off on a tangent somewhere. It should be a story that exemplifies whatever it is you're talking about. Because anytime you tell a story, your audience will turn immediately into the story. So you have to build stories that fit what you're talking about. How many of you have heard somebody speak before who's telling stories and they have nothing to do with whatever it is they want you to do? Right? That's not a great idea. But won't be. You can probably come up with some people that also tell stories that do keep you with them and into the subject that you're talking about. So narration, it's called the narrative paradigm, and what it means is that you look for stories that we talk about to keep an audience with you. All right. And so you take the topic that you're talking about and you find stories, either your own or ones that you can tell. And there's a good discussion in the textbook on, oh, my notes are correct, on page 304 to 305. Read that story there as a part, thinking of it as a part of a speech, because that will help you understand, well, oh, I get it. All right. Paradigm, by the way, just means a conceptual framework that people follow. You can test by it. You can test by this paradigm that this is working. So that's why he uses that. Fisher would tell you that there's been a paradigm shift, which means that we've moved from just giving facts and telling people stuff to this shift to a narrative paradigm. From a rational paradigm to a narrative paradigm. So that, and they good discussion in there about the difference between how it used to be when we used a rational world paradigm to when we were speaking publicly. You know, facts were important. The idea that most people are rational, so they want to hear those facts. And so what we've moved to, though, is that people still want that because we still are rational, but we process it better. It goes through the brain better if we do it through storytelling, narratives. So keep that in mind. Some great information there about assumptions that we make about rational paradigm and narrative paradigm. Keep in mind that the narrative has to have coherence, right, and fidelity. All right. No, narrative coherence would mean, does the story hang together with the points that you're making? Does it fit? Right. And then narrative fidelity would mean, does this story ring true, as they say in the textbook? You know, does it seem to be humane? Those are questions that you ask about the story. So it's a great theory. It's one of my favorites, if you can't tell. So anyway, we're going to move to chapter 25. Okay, chapter 25 moves us into a new section, and it's about mass media. It's about mass communication, but this section here today is about media and culture. So we talk about what's the world like, postmodern world, you know, that's contemporary Western society. How much do we use media? That's a no-brainer. Okay, so we know we use it a lot. Oh, here comes the sun. It's been foggy all morning, so that's why I haven't had the sun problem this morning. Chapter 25 is media ecology. And that's, I'm not going to go into great detail because you have been studying this in Mrs. Poorman's class. This is McLuhan. All right. This is y'all have already talked about some of that, so I'm just going to point you back to some of those issues. Media ecology, we know what media is. And then we talk about the environments that we use media in and how much, so we talk about Postman's amusing us to death and amusing ourselves to death. And so it's fascinating to me to see how much that we do use. So McLuhan, said that the medium is the message. So I don't know where my cell phone is across the room, but so that how many of you have that cell phone in your hand all the time? This workshop I did down in Greenville, everybody had their cell phones out. They were on the table. It's like, and these are grown adults. These are people my age. Some were a little younger, some were a little older. Cell phones out on the table, still fooling with them. So the medium is the message. Was I that boring? I wasn't the only one speaking. So the issue of the challenge of media ecology is that trying to study it because it is so broad. We have invisibility of environments where it's used that we have no clue about, and then the complexity of environments where media is used. But media ecology would mean that do we take care of reining ourselves in? And some of us do and some of us don't. So we have an aspect that where, McLuhan goes into the aspects of the different ages, the tribal age back, of course, that was acoustic. There was no print. Then we go to the age of literary communication, backward storytelling, and that kind of thing. Then we get to the print age. There was lots before we got to the print age, lots of communication. And then we got to the electronic age. And that's where we start seeing, that's the TV and the radio and that kind of stuff. It's not where we are now. All right. In fact, a lot of people would not say we're at the digital age. A lot of people would say that we're past the digital age by the amount of communication that we're doing via electronics. So those become part of it. The ethical reflection on this one is fascinating to me, and I will ask a question about this both on the test and as a forum post. And it's called the Faustian bargain. And if you took literature, Faustus was someone who made a deal with the devil. So have we made a deal with the devil? All right. And this is where Postman arrives on the scene. All right. So have we done this Faustian bargain? Have we made a deal with the devil because of how much we use media these days? And that's a question you need to ask yourselves. One of the things is if you decide that's the area of communication you want to go into, you have to deal with that. All right. And so make sure that you read that section carefully. And you'll see there that's where Postman comes into play here. And then the critique of this chapter is this right? Or isn't it right? All right. So because there are some people who say, well, yeah, he's spot on. And then there are some people who say, no, he's not. So anyway, but McLuhan is one of the most common ones we talk about when we talk about studying media. And we finally get to one that a lot of y'all are going to like, because this is what you said was one of your favorite traditions that you wanted to study things from. And this is Barthus' theory on semiotics. So the semiotic approach to looking at media. And so what we get here is the use of language, right? We study things from the semiotics, the study of social production of meanings from signs, all right? The analysis of anything that can stand for something else. And so it's important for you to think back to when we were talking about language, because of course semiotics deals with the use of language and signs. So that's what this chapter will talk about. It talks about wrestling with signs. How do we come up with meanings for sign? If it's a sign for me, is it the same sign for somebody else? And if it isn't, then how do I make it that sign for them? So we talk about, there's a good discussion. Well, yes, it's still there. I'm thinking maybe they took it out of this newer edition, but there's a talk about the yellow ribbon campaign. How many of you have a ribbon on your car and it's a certain color? They don't talk a whole lot about we've changed the colors of those ribbons, but the yellow ribbon originally came out in the Gulf War, first Gulf War, that to bring our troops home, that you wanted your soldier to come home safely. The interesting thing is, if you know anything about the song, and some of you all do, because some of you all are a little older than the others, all right, that was about a prisoner getting out of prison, all right, and he's coming home, and does his lady want him? All right, so it's a case of, okay, how do we change this metaphor into this means coming home? And now we see those ribbons with a lot of different things. We see it now with the American flag embossed on it, the stars and stripes, and meaning support of soldiers. We see a different color for every disease. We see a color for autism. We see a color for all sorts of different types of cancer. And so that whole metaphor, well, that's what semiotics would say that makes it successful, that that's what does it. Okay. And so that's how we use the signs in society. And are they myths? So you have denotative meanings of the signs and you have connotative meanings of the signs, which we talked about earlier when we talk about language choices. Talk about how do we go about depacking those signs in mass media. Well, I think more so that we do more mass approach with those signs. I can't hit every single individual, so I have to think in terms of who will come with me. And people do. Think of all, I want you to, next time you're out driving, I want you to look for any of those ribbons, right, and see how many people got the message that that's what that stood for. Okay, so, and then we give it a little bit back into the fantasy theme and hear about the fantasy theme of signs. And the critique of this chapter, and there's good discussion here about semiotics goes to the movies, so you'll want to read that section too. But do mythic signs always reaffirm the status quo? Some people would say no. Some people would say no, they're about change. And some people will say, yeah, no, it's just trying to get people to support what we're what we're standing for with this. Oops, wrong place. There. 27, the last chapter, is the cultural studies, Stuart Hall's cultural studies. This chapter picks up where semiotics leaves off. All right, so it takes the signs and studies them in more depth because it looks at the culture that sees this, the culture that's using that form of mass media. The population that's mostly on campus are millennials, getting close to the Gen X folks. And so what they're going to use are not people like I'm a baby boomer. So things are going to be different is what that does. The culture is different. The culture of the seated classes, all right, are different than your culture of the online cohort. All right? And one of the things is age, and one of them is not. And some of them are not, sorry. We just look at different ideological differences when we look at cultures, about how people approach things. We look at democratic pluralism, which means, that's there's a myth that society is held together by common norms such as equal opportunity, respect for diversity, and one person, one vote, individual rights, and rule of law. And the reason that that's a myth is because we know that that's not really what happens. But that's what we say we stand for that, but we know that that's not always what happens. Do we say that? Do we articulate that? Do we do a study of things, a study of those things? This theory draws a lot from Marxist theory, so when you read that, be aware of that. More eclectic, pulling everything in. It talks also about economics and the economics of use of mass media or mass communication tools. Talks about how important discourse, so discursive power, discourse and discursive formation and discursive power deal with how people use discourse. And of course, discourse are frameworks of interpretation, how we interpret things, how we interpret the discourse. I think probably most of this will resonate for you, especially with what you're studying in 1200. About how the corporate control, there's corporate control of mass communication. So those are the gatekeepers. They're the folks, and we'll talk more about gatekeepers later. But what happens in one of the later chapters, what happens is that they take control of the message and decide what the public is going to hear. Talks about cultural factors that affect the selection of news. Things such as ethnocentrism. We're always going to look at ourselves in the best light. The sources, the objectivity, individualism, of course, comes into play, and we've talked about that before, and we'll talk about it later too. And democratic processes. Those are the things that come to the forefront of our news because that's the basis of our culture. So, and there's a good little discussion in there. My favorite program that's not on anymore, the Extreme Makeover Home Edition. That whole idea of, oh, look at this message here. They go in and fix somebody's house, or even sometimes rebuild a whole house that for people who are in need of that. Good discussion about obstinate audiences, but here's the thing. This theory doesn't deal real well with an obstinate audience isn't going to watch yours unless they just want to criticize. All right? An obstinate audience is going to pick their own media that suits their own positions. So that's an interesting one that comes into play there. And the critique speaks to that. Your judgment will depend on your ideology. So your judgment of the media that you encounter will be based on your ideology. That's a no-brainer. So anyway, those are the chapters for this week. And again, there's always more in the chapters and more in the PowerPoints. So I hope you all have a good week. Don't forget, tests are due at 5 o'clock today. And I will see you all next week. If I've forgotten anything, I'll send out an announcement. Please read the announcement messages that I send when they come, because usually I'm dealing with somebody who's asked me. Usually I wait until more than one person asks me. That's why I sent the one the other day. There were a couple people that had asked me about a Friday forum post. So anyway, hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week.